Tonight's program owes thanks to a number of people. Peter Zarkov, chairman of the Russian Veterans Organization. And so he's our right-hand guy when we need to get veterans of the Soviet Army in World War II, and he's come through tonight for us. We have our veteran of World War II who fought in the Battle of Koenigsberg, Yakov Greishner. And we have translation help tonight from Ina Geller, who works at the Museum of Russian Art. And if you haven't been there, it's a great museum, and go there. And you're a docent, and so, yeah, so maybe she'll give you a tour, so, if you're lucky. Okay. Our principal speaker tonight is Christopher Seimer, and he was one of Harold Deutsch's last graduate students. He received his PhD from the University of Minnesota. He teaches around the Twin Cities area, and he's currently a lecturer in history and political science at the University of Wisconsin in River Falls. Tonight is his second roundtable presentation.
This is a map of East Prussia, and I wanted to better illustrate some of the critical features of the battle that are going to really stand out, particularly in the German civilian efforts to escape the Russians. Here's Koenigsberg, and you'll notice that there's this lagoon, the Prussia, which will be frozen at the time of the main battle, which will start in January of 1945. Also, this key point of Pillau leading along this very narrow, about 20 or 30 kilometer long Prussia Näherung, leading to Danzig, which is over here. And this will be a major area where the German civilian population will attempt to escape, while, of course, the Red Army will be trying to cut off these routes along the Baltic. And it's just kind of hard to find, at least in the amount of time I had to prepare for this. I was unable to access many very useful military maps, but I did want to at least lay this out for you to better comprehend the more immediate vicinity of the Battle of Koenigsberg. One of the features of the Russian invasion of East Prussia that really struck out to me as I began to research it was that by the summer of 1944, and certainly through the spring of 1945, the roles and the behaviors and the potentialities of the Red Army and the German Wehrmacht had almost become mirror images from what they were in 1941. In 1941, it was the Soviet top leadership, specifically Stalin, that was inflexible, very slow to react, very, in fact, uncomprehending. It was the Germans that were pursuing an aggressive blitzkrieg. The Soviets often had military officers who were chosen for their political reliability rather than their military acumen in 1941, following the purge of the Red Army officers in 1937. In 1941, the Germans had air superiority, which enabled them to sow chaos among the civilian populations, destroy the Red Air Force pretty much on the ground, and for at least a large part of 1941 enjoyed air superiority in all of their campaigns. The Red Army, in turn, in the face of 1941, would throw together hastily trained and poorly equipped infantry units to try to do anything to stop the Soviet advance. Many of them being created, mobilized, and destroyed in a matter of weeks in the advance, for example, of Panzer Group Guderian towards Moscow, but also in the gigantic encirclements that the Germans were able to accomplish at Kiev and other areas. The Germans, in turn, were practicing what Hitler defined as a Weltanschauungskrieg, a war of worldviews. And behind the German forces in the rear echelons, German units spread terror and death, particularly rear echelon units such as the SS Einsatzgruppen, but also atrocities committed by second echelon German troops against the civilian population of Russia. And in this way, the unbelievable catalog of atrocities committed against the Soviet peoples by the Germans proved them to be among the most cruel conquerors in history. Among the Soviet forces, again in 1941, many of them would break and in a panic would run into special police units, the NKVD, to enforce harsh discipline to prevent this panic from spreading, with drumhead court-martials, ruthlessly suppressing what the Soviet regime termed cowardice and treason in surrendering to the German forces. As I say, this was the situation on the Russian front in 1941. But in 1944, by the summertime of 1944, the situation had changed altogether. Now we see blind obstinacy and stubborn lack of flexibility on the part of Hitler, with his numerous no-retreat orders. All of the dynamic flexibility that he granted his commanders in the early years of the war now was replaced by a self-destructive insistence on giving up no territory, which only facilitated the destruction of countless German troops with his no-retreat orders. It was the Soviets who, through bitter lessons learned at Stalingrad and at the Great Battle of Kursk in 1943, will, by the summertime of 1944, have perfected the largest offensive operation of the war in Operation Bagration, where the Russians will in turn be masters of the blitzkrieg, only this is a blitzkrieg against German forces, where the Russians will exercise air superiority with spectacular firepower concentrations, allowing deep armor penetrations and the encirclement of three German armies in this great offensive in 1944 summer. Coordinated with the Allied invasion in France in June, the situation on the Russian front will be dictated by the Soviets having the initiative. And it will be the Germans then who throw together hastily organized Volkssturm or people's militia units in a desperate effort to keep the Russians from breaking through. It will be the Germans who will have Sicherheitspolizei and Feldpolizei units executing drumhead court-martials and executions of German civilians and German soldiers who attempt to escape from the Red Army. And it will be the Soviets who will practice a combined arms blitzkrieg on a gigantic scale, and they will have the logistic and material capacity to succeed in this great offensive in 1944, which led to the liberation of Belorussia, as well as breaking the German, earlier breaking the German siege at Leningrad. And so by the fall of 1944, by October, it would be the Germans who will be trying to desperately bolster their defenses in eastern Prussia with these very poorly trained Volkssturm units of teenage Hitler youth and older men who are being sent to stop the first-rate, experienced and battle-hardened Red Army that was coming after them. Similarly, it will be with a very profound sense of vengeance and a desire to avenge the suffering of Russia that had experienced the height of cruelty by the Nazi invasion. that the Russians will approach the frontier of East Prussia like a avenging storm. And so one of the things that I wanted to briefly talk about in regard to the attitudes that were being generated is I don't want to dwell on the racist and vicious propaganda indoctrination that the Nazis had inflicted upon the German people and motivated the cruelty of their actions there. But I wanted you to have a look at some of the posters and propaganda that helped animate the Red Army soldier as it approached East Prussia. Significantly, East Prussia will be the first actual German soil that Russian troops will set foot upon, and therefore it is in East Prussia that the Russians get their first chance to exact this vengeance against the Germans who had attacked them and had caused such suffering in Russia. And so one of the earliest propaganda posters to mobilize the Russian forces was this embodiment of the Rodina, the motherland, calling upon the Russians to fight. Germans were often portrayed, almost universally, as mad beasts. And there's the Red Army bayonet keeping the German beast at bay. Here we have again the embodiment of Russia, the Rodina, as a woman calling upon the valorous soldiers of the Red Army to defend and to throw back the invader. Hearkening to the Russian history, and if I'm not mistaken, this is Alexander Nevsky, isn't it? Who fought against the Teutonic Knights that invaded in this region. We have the Red Army soldier with a brace of bayonets, and then the spirit of Nevsky leading them in the fight against the German invader. Interestingly, the very image of Alexander Nevsky was played up in Soviet propaganda prior to the war by Sergei Eisenstein's superb motion picture entitled Alexander Nevsky, which featured the citizens of Novgorod under the leadership of Nevsky throwing back the Germanic invaders in the celebrated battle on the ice of Lake Ladoga. And this film was produced prior to the German invasion as a warning to the Germans of what was going to come. And so this significantly, in contrast to Soviet propaganda during the Communist Revolution and the Communist Civil War, which emphasized ideology and Bolshevism, when the war started, national symbols of Russia, not communism, were highly prominent in Soviet propaganda. So, for example, the image of the Rodina and the image of Nevsky, rather than the party, differentiated Soviet graphic illustrations of the war period from Russian propaganda art from the Civil War period. A very strong image that was prominent in Russian propaganda was the victimization of Russian women and children.
This is a poster that's addressing the soldiers of the Red Army.
Yeah.
And speaking that it's a woman addressing men, Russian men soldiers, asking to protect her from rape and shame that she could be subjected by the German soldiers.
So there you have a woman, a bound Russian woman, asking the Russian soldiers to protect her against disgrace and rape at the hands of the Germans.
It says, "Our all hope is for you, the Red Army soldier."
And so here you have a Russian shooting, or a German shooting a Russian woman behind a prison camp, and she's saying, "Our only hope is you." soldier of the Red Army. So imagine the psychological effect of this propaganda. And here we have a child with a murdered mother, a burning village, and using the diminutive form of father, daddy, avenge us, avenge us. And then there's a mother with a murdered child and the village burning behind her. I think you get a very clear message from this. And here's the elderly babushka, again, with villages in flames calling. And there's one force that's going to avenge these victims. And that force is the Red Army that's advancing on East Prussia. To arms, Slavic brothers, crush the fascist oppressors. And here, to end this little exercise in Russian propaganda, the Russian soldier is smashing the German sign that's marked to the east, saying, we're going to the west. And that's exactly what they did. Thank you so much. So here's a, oddly enough, the West Point has marvelously detailed maps of campaigns in France, Italy, and the Pacific. Their maps on the Russian front, however, are perhaps somewhat lacking in detail relative to the maps they have of down to, I think, platoon level operations in France. In any event, this map is a map of the magnificent Soviet advances in Operation Bagration, where they're going to advance to the actual border of East Prussia with an offensive that will be launched on June 22nd, 1944, 3 years to the day of the German invasion of the Soviet Union. And they will lead to the liberation of Minsk and the destruction of the German Army Group Center, which will essentially break the back of the German army in the east. The German army in the north, which had been pushed back from Leningrad, is going to be trapped in the Kurland Peninsula up here with their backs to the Baltic, and they will essentially be cut off and play no significant role in the defense of Germany. Hitler's obstinacy in preventing significant withdrawals against Army Group Center will lead to a catastrophe for German arms in this region. And this will be the largest offensive operation undertaken by any side in the war, Operation Bagration. So by October, Russian forces will be penetrating the very frontier of East Prussia, and the front will have, in essence, collapsed. The Germans will have lost, I forget, I think you had a presentation on this a few months ago on Bagration. It was the most spectacular victory that the Soviets had in the war. Now, one of the qualities of the fighting in Belorussia was that prior to Operation Bagration, which, as I say, launched in June, was the use of partisan forces, particularly around the Pripyat marshes, which was excellent terrain for the growing partisan forces to harass and to ruin German lines of communication towards the front. Now, the Germans are still reeling from their losses at Kursk in 43, but in the spring of 1944, the Germans will undertake extremely brutal, punitive operations against partisans and partisan sympathizers, so-called, in Belorussia. So what this means is as the Russian troops advanced into Belorussia, they came across Russian villages of slaughtered civilians and that had been annihilated by the German anti-partisan forces. In many cases, they would come upon the bodies of murdered civilians that were still warm from the German units as they withdrew. So again, what I'm trying to paint a picture for you is the sense of rage that was building up in many of the Red Army soldiers as they crushed their German opponents and drove towards the Reich. The leader of the Third Belarusian Front was General Konstantin Rokossovsky. He will be the main architect of the plan for Bagration, which initially he had a hard time selling to Stalin, but will ultimately prevail. And he will be, he's going to play a key role in the invasion of East Prussia. Here's a Russian map showing the Red Army. The last time I taught World War II, I put this one up and I just said to the students, if this gives you an idea of a storm of Red Army troops going to the Reich, that's exactly the impression I want to give you. But you can see here, actually, this is kind of I like this Russian map because it shows these encirclements. This used to be what the Germans would do to Russian forces. Now the Russian forces are just overwhelming and encircling German forces. And as I say, they're coming up to the frontier here. Now this is going to make then, with German forces from Army Group North trapped in the Courland Peninsula, Soviet forces are going to drive towards the Baltic to cut off the lines of retreat. And the Germans are going to, as we get into the fall of 1944 and through the winter of winter of 44-45 and into the spring of 45, will undertake the largest evacuation by sea in history to try to free units from both the Courland and then eventually from Koenigsberg and other parts of East Prussia. So one of the challenges to the Russians will be to try to interdict the sea transports that are allowing Germans to flee to the east. This obviously includes Wehrmacht units as well as civilians. However, it can't be emphasized how devastating the effect of Operation Bagration was to German resistance. General Guderian will say that the Army Group Center will have essentially ceased to exist. Remnants of Army Group Center will withdraw to East Prussia and will ultimately die fighting around Koenigsberg. Here we have Soviet infantry units overrunning a German position in Belarus. Now, because for a variety of reasons, not least of which was Western skepticism that Russia had been as successful as it had been in Operation Bagration, Stalin ordered a special operation to parade some 17,000 of the captured German troops from Operation Bagration, from Army Group Center, through Moscow to show the world and the people of the Soviet Union the extent of the catastrophe which had befallen the German forces. And again, more prisoners were taken in Operation Bagration than were taken at Stalingrad. So clearly, the Germans have effectively lost the war by the end of Operation Bagration. Not coincidentally, on July 20th of 1944, a group of army officers decided to express their disapproval of Hitler's leadership in a relatively emphatic manner at Rostenburg in East Prussia. And this was where, facing the disastrous outcome of Operation Bagration and coupled with the Allied breakout at Normandy, the ill-fated effort to kill Hitler on July 20th is part of the fabric of events that are going on in Germany at this time, and in particularly in East Prussia. It will be a tragedy of epic proportions that Hitler will not have been killed by Count Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg and his effort to bring the war to early conclusion. But alas, he had the devil's own luck, and the psychopath would live long enough to cause the death of hundreds of thousands of more people. So this map shows the general operations of the Russians. Now, as things get into the fall of 1944, it's going to kind of slow down along this front. For one thing, Russian forces will encounter ferocious resistance when they entered East Prussia. The Germans will have elaborate defenses, even though they're under strength. And they'll, as one Russian veteran that I spoke to a long time ago described it, the Russians would fight, or the Germans fought like trapped wolves as you got closer to Berlin. And so it won't be, there's going to be a gradual effort to build up forces around and gradually move in to East Prussia. One of the theories that Rokossovsky wanted to do was to drive towards Danzig and cut off Koenigsberg and the rest of East Prussia from a land connection with the rest of the Reich. Now, mind you, the main thrust of Soviet military operations is in the direction of Berlin, but they couldn't let the forces in East Prussia simply be there to threaten their flank. So, starting on January 2nd of 1945, Rokossovsky's second Belarusian front will drive towards Danzig, but it runs right into bad weather, and also severe resistance from the Gross Deutschland division, which is going to slow them down. The fifth, they're going to keep pushing, and German leaders will ask Hitler for a chance to withdraw from this. Hitler will take 9 days to make up his mind to allow them to withdraw. And that's pretty narrow. So what's going to happen is Russian forces are going to get really, really close to cutting German escape routes along the Baltic, but they don't quite cut them. And part of the Battle of Koenigsberg is going to keep escape routes open for German civilians to flee. So I'm not going to give you a blow-by-blow of the battle per se, but one of the things that's going to make the assault on Koenigsberg particularly ferocious to the civilian population was up until August, or was it October? In any event, Koenigsberg hadn't been part of the war. It's only late in 44 when the RAF will firebomb the city. And when's that? It was August, yeah, okay. And that will be the first, it will be a very disastrous attack on Koenigsberg. But even after this bombing attack, the people of Prussia, because the media was completely controlled by the propaganda ministry in Berlin, had been told relentlessly that it was impossible for Russian forces, to enter German soil. And so for many of the people in East Prussia, they believed this propaganda. They didn't know what was coming their way when the Red Army was advancing. They were completely lied to. And many of the Nazi leaders, where the idea of even talking about preparing for an evacuation was deemed as treasonous, would put roadblocks, literal roadblocks, in the way of people trying to escape up until up until the last minute when the major Soviet offensive against Koenigsberg starts. Now, many Germans in East Prussia will try to escape, and the lucky ones will get away in the fall of 1944. But they need to get around the Nazi bureaucracy in order to do this. They need to find they can bribe or somehow get permission to escape, because even talking about escape at that time was deemed, you were considered a traitor to the Reich and dealt with in that fashion. And again, mind you, the SS at this time has complete supremacy in Germany. Following the July 20th bomb plot, the SS has gained ascendancy over all other forces inside Germany, and they are doubly fanatical at suppressing even the remotest hint of treason. And so one of the bitterest things for the German civilian population was the execution of their own people by the SS security forces, because the German people had the sense to try to get out of the way of the Red Army. Adding to the buildup of fear for the Russian offensive, which is really going to blast off in January of 1945, was the massacre of German civilians at a village called Nemensdorf in October of 1944. This will be reconquered by German forces, and Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry will flood Germany with images of the murdered German civilians as evidence of the barbaric savagery of the Red Army as it was advancing. Now, they weren't showing movies of the massacred villages of Belorussia, Ukraine, and other parts of the Soviet Union. But this then began to, this was an effort to build up fear and to try to force the Germans in the position of, you have nothing else to do but fight for your lives. In 1943, Nazi propaganda will take the position that finally they will adopt a total war attitude. And one of the slogans of this total war was Volk steh auf und Sturm bricht los. People arise, let the storm break. While the Russians are advancing towards East Prussia, the propaganda ministry is investing in a movie in color, which was meant to be the Gone with the Wind of Germany. And that was called Kolberg, which is a Prussian town which had resisted Napoleon. And they're pulling troops to do the battle scenes because Goebbels will say that one good movie is better than a victory at the front, to build up the morale to defend. And so literally, and this is the tone, the slogan, Volk steh auf and Sturm bricht los, is a phrase constantly repeated as the stalwart Germans defend themselves against the evil French, and the Reichs, what did they call it? The Reichswater Corps. Christian Zuderbaum will be the German woman who's saved from the evil French. I mean, the thing is, it's almost incomprehensible that this was the investment of German resources at this time. But there's many aspects of Nazi administration that are incomprehensible. One of the things that was a major component was the Volkssturm, Freiheit und Leben, for freedom and life. And this was the last of the Wehrmacht. And here you have a teen Hitler youth alongside an older man. And these were the forces that were going to resist the crack troops of the Red Army. And so the major Russian offensive, they start to probe heavily. They tried to towards Danzig on January 2nd. By January 12th, there was a major push to try to drive towards Koenigsberg and also into Pomerania. At the same time, we're driving towards Berlin. And you can see these pockets where the Germans are desperately trying to hold out to keep the doorway along the Baltic open for escape. And Along this broad front, the German forces again will try to resist as heavily as they can. They will inflict heavy casualties on the Russians. The Russians will have, in many cases, advantages of 15-1 in their conflicts with the Germans. They will also, when the weather permitted, have absolute control of the skies, and the German forces will suffer almost unending aerial attack, as well as being outnumbered vastly by artillery. Interestingly enough, on the very day that Auschwitz will be liberated by forces of the Ukrainian front outside of Krakow, January 27th, Russian forces will get to the Prussia Hof, that lagoon along that I showed you that is south and west of Koenigsberg. And so the fighting to control that route out is going to be very critical. So as I say, by January, Russian troops will be here. There's going to be hellacious fighting up here. This town of Pillau, which is accessible by rail from Koenigsberg, will be the main port of departure for Koenigsberg people who are trying to get out by boat. Also, people are trying to flee to Danzig, where, again, Rokossovsky is trying to drive to the north. So a lot of the most intense fighting was to keep this route open, and then really intense fighting here by the Germans to try to keep Koenigsberg open as well. And the Russians, again, are outnumber them, but the German nut is very difficult to crack. The commander who will take over the assault on Koenigsberg, and Koenigsberg is going to hold out. The Russians will really start to drive on it in January, but they're going to hold out into April. Will be Alexander Vasilevsky. This is the final assault on Koenigsberg, but one of the things that this map shows, which I got from the redoubtable Wikipedia, is at least this shows the tertiary defense lines anchored by these 19th century fortresses that the city of Koenigsberg had erected. These were these massive redoubts, but there was an outer line of defense, a middle line of defense, and then an inner line of defense. And Russian forces are going to really pound this city hard to prepare the way to finally make the assault. Here's some 152 millimeter self-propelled guns on the approach to Koenigsberg. Again, weather's going to be an enemy of the Russian advance. The drive towards Moscow will also be part of the equation, but it's kind of a grind through February and March until finally, on April 6th, the final battle for Koenigsberg will be initiated with by some estimates, a 20-1 advantage. And defending the city is this motley collection of police units, Volkssturm, remnants of the of Army Group Center, even German naval personnel will be given rifles, but the Germans will have limited heavy weapons inside the citadel, limited ammunition. Starvation will be a problem of food supplies.
It says, wipe off the face of the earth the German forts of Koenigsberg.
Okay, so that's a little surprise for the German defenders, and you can kind of see this is the kind of artillery that's being dropped on this city. And so about 90% of the city will be destroyed by the end of the battle. This is a propaganda poster put up in the last extremity. This actually comes from Breslau, but it's indicative of the kind of desperate maneuvers the Germans were doing with the Volkssturm. This one says, for Panzer Schreck, or the terror of tanks, that's you. And so you get to go and blow up a tank. Here's some poor Volkssturm with their Panzerfaust ready to go blow up a tank. And this was the kind of conditions. By the way, the weather we're experiencing today is very similar to what it was like in January when the Russians make their big push. Here's the kind of stuff that Russian soldiers would find as they advanced into East Prussia. And again, look at the parallels to the same thing the Russians were saying in 1941. Here the Germans are saying, wir kämpfen für die Zukunft unserer Kinder. We are fighting for the future of our children. So you see, even in the type of rhetoric being used, the parallel construction to what the Soviets were saying, the defense of the children, is used to help bolster morale. In German literature about this period, this is referred to as die große Flucht, the great trek or the great escape. And this is going to involve some, at least the numbers are very hard to pin down on this, but hundreds of thousands of East Prussians and people fleeing from further territories to the east are going to try to make their escape, as I showed you, along that very narrow spit of land and along the frozen lagoon. Here they're walking on the ice bridge as long as it lasted. Now, these were subject to devastating air attacks, particularly by Ilyushin ground attack aircraft that would blast holes in the ice. Many of the refugees would overload their wagons and then they'd plunge through the ice. And Soviet air forces had, as one pilot said, we simply couldn't miss. The Germans will attempt desperate efforts to try to keep the escape routes open through January through April. But they would rebuff the Russians. I mean, this was by no means an easy fight, but the Germans had no chance to ultimately succeed. One of the more tragic incidents were Soviet submarines were sinking some of the ships that were attempting to escape with refugees. One of actually the largest single loss of life in maritime history will be when the Wilhelm Gustloff will be sunk in January 30th in the Baltic Sea. It will have about 9 million. It's a big boat. But no, there were 9,000 refugees on it, and only 1,000 were able to escape. And there's going to be several other of these. This is sort of a nightmare, like the sinking of those hell ships that we've heard about here, that were full of American POWs. The Red forces will finally bust in intense fighting from April 6th to April 9th. Following devastating bombardments, will break into the core of the city. And finally, the Wehrmacht commander Otto Losch will surrender the city of Koenigsberg on April 9th, 1945. The people of Koenigsberg that were left are going to suffer terribly under the period of occupation. Disease and starvation will be rampant, and also ultimately all Germans in East Prussia will be expelled from Prussia in the largest ethnic cleansing in history of ethnic Germans from Eastern Europe after the war. And the veterans of the Red Army will be awarded the Koenigsberg Medal after their successful operations in this sector. So I hope that I've given you some information to go on when it comes to analyzing this critical battle, this first time Red Army troops entered German territory. And the sentiment of many of the veterans is that something as awful as this should never happen again, and I think we can all share that. So thank you for your attention.
Our right is our veteran tonight. So this is a picture of him. I think this is outside Leningrad. We'll talk about that. And here he is at the end of the war. This is in 1945. He's just gotten out of the hospital. And here he is, a proud veteran. So, how many of you had ever heard of the Battle of Koenigsberg? About half the people. That's pretty good. Everybody's heard of Stalingrad. I've talked to Russians that I know who had grandparents who served both at Stalingrad and at Koenigsberg, and they said Koenigsberg was a much worse battle. Okay. Now, if you talk to the general American population, how many do you think know that the Russian front even happened? World War II was won two places, the Battle of the Bulge and Normandy, right? Okay. Okay. Yeah, we faced one, maybe two German battalions under strength on Omaha Beach. Okay. But when you see battles about the East, you're talking about whole armies maneuvering. Now, American casualties in World War II. Okay. Stand up. Okay. This is the population of the United States. This is 500,000 Americans that died in World War II. Half in combat, the other half disease, accidents, whatever. Okay. Now, if from the wall here to that wall there, if I could have this row and this row stand up all the way across, you guys too. That's Soviet casualties in World War II. So they estimate 27 million. You can sit down now. Thank you. Estimated 27 million casualties in the war. But I read a report today that said the actual losses, if you figure in all the babies that were never born because the parents were killed in the war, by 1959 the total comes up to about 49 million. Okay? That's a population of about 180 million when the war started. So we can't fathom the suffering of the Soviet Union. In addition, if you think about the damage to the United States in World War II, there were a couple of incidents of Japanese submarines surfacing and firing a few rounds into the California coast. There were a couple dozen civilian casualties at Pearl Harbor. And the Japanese, in an attempt to firebomb the United States, launched a whole bunch of balloons into the high atmosphere. And I think there were 3 American civilians that were killed when they found one in the forest someplace in Oregon. Yeah, Oregon. So that's how our homeland suffered versus the Soviet Union, which if you consider the area between the Atlantic coast and the Mississippi River, virtually every village, every town is damaged or destroyed. Every bridge is damaged and destroyed. Every crop is damaged and destroyed. That's what the Soviets had to deal with. So the scale of warfare, Americans don't get it. You know, they don't fathom what they went through. So now we'll have a first-person account from our veteran. Where were you born?
Romania in 1924.
Yes. Okay. Can you hear him okay? Yep. Okay. And if it's easier to speak Russian, then we'll do that.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's
You decide.
Romanian.
Okay. And where were you living in 1940?
And part on the Moldova.
Moldova. Yeah.
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 Part of Romania.
But
Moldova.
in 1940, Stalin annexed it.
Yeah. The Russians took over.
Yeah.
This place we became just Soviets.
And what
So-
happened to you then?
Yeah. they mobilized yes, young people, 17, 16, if he's tall enough, and to send them to be Russian.
Mhm.
They sent them in Kazakhstan, Kopchitav, that's about 5,000 miles away from home. And therefore, they would like my parents to be not arrested. So we were there, worked in speaking new language, Russian, and and then in the July, broke out war.
June
June
1941. Yes,
1941.
the war started. And
Started
were you drafted right away?
right away.
And you're
Into the
17 years old.
Yeah, they were uh, soldiers, but not real soldiers. They sent us way west, along with Moscow and a little town called Klin, and we start in, teaching us to be soldiers,
In the infantry.
infantry. Yeah. And I was very good at mathematics, and therefore I was very good trained. They gave me a good to be a good soldier. But I remember when I passed, and I forgot one thing, and I said, in my opinion, that teacher said, stop it. They don't need your opinion. I understood.
You're in the Army now.
He said, my opinion, no opinion. We don't need your opinion. Say what you need. And I understood right away. So
When did you
keep your mouth shut?
when did you finish your training?
Finish the training, and then I was promoted as a sergeant, large sergeant. There, one rank, not like.
But you got a promotion out of training.
Yeah.
Mhm. But when did you
Yes.
finish training? Do you remember what month it was?
Yeah, after 4 months, they show me how to shot it. Станковый пулемет.
Oh my God, some kind of submachine gun.
Oh,
Machine
they
gun.
trained you to fire a machine gun.
Machine gun,
And
yeah.
already now the Maxim gun,
Yeah.
the heavy on the wheels, and
Yeah, yes.
everything
Okay.
I was good at.
Mhm.
They make me the commander of a group, 5 people, and I was conducting them. All the they were laughing because I couldn't talk good Russian, but they respect me. Not good. And the first battle was in Stancy Nga.
Station Nga.
Nga,
Was his first time.
yeah. What is it?
Can you hear me?
NGA. 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 That was the first battle. And
Oh, now it's on.
I'm gone. Those people, they listen to what Stancy
With the rail station called Nga.
Nga.
Yes.
And,
That I,
and do you know that town?
I think,
I don't know.
Okay. Was it by Leningrad?
yes,
Okay.
they, Stancy Nga.
Okay. So right away you went to Leningrad. And
Yes, and include in the Leningrad front.
and did you stay in Leningrad until January of 44 when
44, yeah.
when the city was
Then
liberated?
Yeah, liberated. I was in Pulkovsky Высоты, Pulkovo Observatory.
It's Pulkovsky Hills. That's the hill next to Leningrad. It's outskirts of Leningrad. Where
Yeah.
a lot of defensive.
Pulkovo.
It's not here. I'm sorry. I'll take this one.
He was by Pulkovsky Hills. That's not far. That's out. Sorry. He was by Pulkovsky Hills. Can you hear me now? Good. Okay. He was by Pulkovsky Hills. That's the outskirts and area close to Leningrad, and that's where one of the defensive areas for Leningrad military was.
Yeah.
And is this working now? Okay. Yeah, the microphones here are always a challenge. So, were you involved in a lot of heavy fighting in Leningrad?
Yeah, like
Yes.
fighting.
Mhm.
But most was that fighting because the German were busy with Stalingrad
Mm-hmm.
down there. You saw that
Yes.
soldiers
When
captured, yeah, they had no interest in taking the Leningrad.
when
No crime. They were busy in Kursk,
Mhm.
so,
when
Stalingrad and so on.
when you were in Leningrad, did you hear about the battles of Moscow and the battles of Stalingrad and the battles of Kursk?
Yeah, everything was written down in the newspapers, and you saw
Mhm.
what they want you to know.
Yeah. And that gave you hope for victory.
Yeah.
And your parents were back in Moldova,
Back in Moldova.
and you had no contact.
No.
Yeah.
Then I was in the hospital, and then they demobilized me in 1945.
We'll come back to that. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
We'll get to that later.
Okay. Maybe I have.
So in 1944, you advanced then
Yeah.
across northern Russia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All the way to the East
What-
Prussian border.
This to show you how much American help
Mhm.
in Lend-Lease.
Yeah.
Oh,
So he's got a picture of supplies coming
for
in
the
here.
first time, we eat meat. We didn't have
But But it wasn't just any old meat. It was
No.
special meat.
Good meat.
Yeah, no, but it was even better than good meat.
Yeah.
It was spam
Yeah.
from Minnesota.
No, then,
Yeah.
then it, yeah. Okay. And the company. What called the company?
Spam.
Oh,
And there it
Yeah.
is.
here's
Yeah.
here's
Everybody here knows about spam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's staying in that cold Carablé,
In the ship.
in
the
the
ship.
ship. And the American start cutting that
Cutting
spam.
up, cutting up the spam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were looking, and then he said, "Help yourself." And I said, "Need to help."
Mhm.
They said, "Yeah, we eat it." Ah, I didn't know what means help yourself.
Yeah.
To help. What help?
Yeah.
To eat. And the first time we eat meat, cut meat and give it to, oh, good. Yeah.
What was the feeling among the soldiers when you entered East Prussia?
And they say from Moscow comes. I saw American, but when comes to the Russians, they didn't know. Moscow help,
Mhm.
not America.
But
Yeah.
but what did the soldiers think when they got into East Prussia? This is the time for revenge.
After the war,
No. In 1944, when you were entering across the German border.
they feel then it's good to go west than east.
Mm-hmm.
That was good. That was American help, Lend-Lease. Oh, very anything that smoking and medical and everything Lend-Lease gave 1,000 tons. Look at this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Go.
Lots of supplies.
Oh, a lot of supply. Millions and millions. And the American ships go under the sink. But they go sent
Going to Murmansk.
Yeah. No, they did never stop. Lend-Lease.
Did you feel when you got into East Prussia and got close to Koenigsberg? Did you feel that the Germans were fighting harder?
They fought very hard.
Mhm.
Was
Was that-
they little kids were mobilized, but they couldn't stand. I didn't have that map to show how we conquered Pillau, the city of Pillau, and then Koenigsberg.
So were you at Pillau? Were you in the north?
In Prussia. Yeah.
In your machine gun section,
And the machine guns.
you had a man. But in
Yeah.
your machine gun section, you had a man
Yeah.
who
a man
didn't want to listen to you.
Yeah.
What was his story? Remember that story?
Yeah. He was a captain in Bagration, Masтерская shop.
The weapon workshop.
Okay.
Yeah, but a general, a Russian general, was shot himself accidentally.
The captain shot the general accidentally.
He shot himself.
Oh, the captain shot himself?
A general shot himself.
Oh,
And then the captain, was taking all the
he lost his rank.
and give it to me to be a soldier. He wouldn't listen to me.
So the captain lost his rank,
yeah,
and you got him as a private, and you're a sergeant, but he didn't want to listen to you.
he wouldn't listen to me.
So what did you do with him?
What can you do? Not everybody's listening.
Yeah. So
And then I was wounded.
and when were you wounded? Early
I
or
was wounded
was it?
in 1945, 14 January.
14th of January.
Yeah.
And now, if you think
Yeah.
about
Yeah, it's like it is now the anniversary.
if you think about,
I
we
did,
hear
yeah.
about the Battle of the Bulge in December and January of 1945. It was a record cold winter, and
Yeah,
so what blew into Belgium first it hit England, then it blew into Belgium and northern
Yeah.
France, and then it worked its way across Germany into East Prussia, and so that was the weather conditions he was dealing with. So snow, heavy snow and cold, unusually so. And so the 14th of January, and it's cold.
Cold.
And
Yeah.
how were you wounded?
I was wounded here.
But what from what?
Everywhere.
Artillery.
Artillery from the Germans. Very, by Koenigsberg.
What about, were you with your machine gun section?
Yeah.
Were they wounded too?
For me, as the commander, it was first wounded. And they, everywhere, blood, from here, from there. The whole hand was full of blood, and for losing most of blood, I fell down and I didn't know. And then I saw a part of my bone, yellow bone, hanging out. And I fell down and I woke up. I saw nobody around.
But
How much I saw wounded like this.
that's okay.
No,
But anyway,
it's a,
yeah, we'll get it out later. We'll get it out
Yeah.
later because they can't see it anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're surrounded by wounded. But wasn't there something too, where your wounds were in your upper body and your
Yeah.
legs weren't wounded?
Yeah.
And what did
Yeah.
someone say to you?
Then they, you after, well, still, the Germans were looking their loss and our loss, because Koenigsberg was taken 3 times, 3 charge, 1, 2, 3. And
3 attacks.
the 3 attacks. And when I fell down, I waited to get help, and then it was he. He came to see, to get me help. And he saw legs is good. And somebody called him, what happened? His legs are good. Leave him alone. He will walk. I saw somebody with his belly, all the intestine aside, and a lot of wounded people. I have the pictures. If somebody took pictures and I bought it in Leipzig by the. Yeah.
That's okay. We'll look for it later. Okay.
I have it here.
That's okay. We'll look for it later.
Give me the I'll give it to you. Yeah. Oh. Oh.
Yeah. People can come and look at it later. If it's too small, they can't
All
see it.
over.
So you got left on the battlefield.
Yeah, what's left.
So talk about that.
And then they came and they put, laid down шинель, как coat.
They laid down coats.
Coat.
They were German coats, weren't
German coat. Good coat. Laid
they?
10 of them.
They made a bed kind of for you.
Yeah. Put me on there and some over me, laid down. Somebody will help you.
Someone will come back and get you later.
And after
How many hours were you there?
25 hours
25 hours laying on
Yeah.
the battlefield in January.
in January.
And
Then was night, and I saw the stars, and I thought, I am on the other world. Maybe I'll see Mama, Papa. I cried. Nobody helped. And then I heard that was a dog. And the dog, and they had called, yo, come here. The name of the dog. Yeah. And he wouldn't go. That dog was looking for alive,
looking for the wounded,
for the wounded.
and they found you.
And they found, they sent, and he wouldn't go. Then they came, and I said, help me. So that was put in our bag with one horse.
One horse.
One horse. I remember that. And took me to the American hospital. It was like a circus, no? with the такой как шапито.
Like a circus tent.
Yeah. What seven
This is the same color?
семь раптов. Знаешь, где лежали.
Some levels of
Levels, yeah, levels. And I was put
The bunk beds. Bunk beds were 7 high.
seven.
7 levels of bunk beds.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was put in the most
On the top.
7 at the top. And I saw what is the operation.
You could watch the surgeries.
For surgeries.
Yeah.
And they put it was the surgeon was smoking.
Mhm.
And then they put soldiers. He was only his job to smoke and to make this sign where to cut off a hand or a leg. They put some
Chloroform.
water
Chloroform.
and cup the drops, and he fall asleep. And then uh, nurse was giving him chloroform, and he was put asleep. And then they took all the what
Uniforms?
yeah, and see it. And the doctor was put a sign where to cut. And then they took a saw, a simple saw, but was shiny. And was chick, 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 no leg.
Cut the leg off.
Then they put the flash up, and then they saw, put back, bandage, next.
Were you afraid you might be next?
I said, oh, my hand will go down in there. Yeah,
But they saved your arm.
Not was a man, but a woman. And she started asking me to count. Then and I fell asleep. When I woke up, I save you and give me a like this.
Cast.
Yeah.
And how long were you recovering in the hospital?
6 months.
6 months.
6 months. And when I finished, I finished more, but I worked on. Was a woman, she asked me, okay, Yashka. I didn't know, they called me, what Yakov, they called Yashka. There I stop.
What?
There I stop. What I was talking about.
You were. It was after the war, and
Yeah.
a lady is talking to you.
A lady.
You're a veteran. You're a wounded veteran.
Yeah. She wasn't a lady. She was a polkovnik.
She wasn't a lady, she was a colonel.
A colonel.
Colonel.
Okay.
And she asked. She said, "I'll put you to go to Moscow. They will give you a place where to live. They'll give you a place where to live and where to work and everything. And I said,
Because you're a wounded veteran, they'll give you a house and a job.
A house and a job and everything because you're a nice guy. And I said, no, I want home.
You want to go back to Moldova.
Moldova. I came Moldova, my God, all broken. Nobody,
No family anymore.
no family,
No home.
no mama, no papa. Ah, they told me they were go to in Poland to go to work there. They vanished. They were killed. Yeah, I go home. I go home. I passed my exam very easy, and the teacher, college, and math. And there I met my Claudia. She was studying language and I was studying mathematics. And after 3 years, I was a teacher because they didn't have teachers in 1946, 1947. It was only making kolkhoz.
They weren't training the teachers, they were trying to organize collective farms. That was the focus.
Yeah, it was, they were, all the people were sent to Siberia. Was not better than from the Germans.
You have a joke
Yeah.
about Stalin and Hitler.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell that?
Yes. Stalin met Hitler, and Hitler was in blood until his neck, and Stalin was only on his waist. And then Hitler said, "That's not fair. I know who kills more people. Why is not fair?"
Why isn't Stalin in
Yeah.
blood as deep as Hitler?
Yeah. And Stalin said to him, "Don't be silly. I am on Zhukov's
Standing on General Zhukov.
General Zhukov.
Yeah.
That's a joke, but that's what.
Yeah.
Because
But serious business.
Stalin killed 20 million people. And
Hitler didn't have as much time to do it. He only had 11 years. So.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. In the Soviet Army, when there was an attack, there was a cheer, hurrah. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Can you do that?
You had no time for hurrah.
The Germans heard that from thousands of voices, and it scared them.
Oh, yeah. Nobody's scared of the voices.
Oh, yeah. When you hear thousands of voices, it can be scary. Yeah. Because they know what's coming.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have we have we have time for some questions. We're gonna each to use this one, and then we'll share this one. Chris, you want to come up?
Okay, I'll go up the aisle here. Questions for any people here? Yes.
Where did the civilians go when they got on the ships?
Where did the German civilians go? Where did the German civilians go when they got on the ship? So, Chris, do you want
Chris.
Chris.
In the mic.
Go as far as Danzig, not very far, and then try to get out. Otherwise, they'd head as far west as they could. I mean, you were trying to get, as people were going to Hamburg. I mean, if you could make it, but they were, generally they were relatively short trips because it was mostly to get out of the field of operation. Now, mind you, the primary Russian drive is towards Berlin, so there will be operations to go into the western part of Prussia, which is known as Pomerania. So you had to, so one of the tragedies for the German civilians during the Grosse Flucht was that you had to stay ahead of the Russians, and Russians could move a lot faster in T-34-85s than you could in your horse-drawn cart in sub-zero temperatures in winter. So, and as I say, they won't even authorize German citizens to withdraw from Koenigsberg until late in January. Now, many people had tried, were fleeing before then, but the big flight came from January through April. So throughout that whole winter period, you have people trying to move in a variety of ways, and it was to get as far away from the Russian front, where the front action was, as possible. But obviously you weren't going long distances and then coming back. You'd get them out of danger and then try to zip back and get more people. This was a huge operation, though. It's a chapter in naval history that's actually relatively understudied, because it was the largest evacuation in wartime ever.
Yakov, hey, a fascinating story you told, and I want to say thank you for your service in sharing that. Just could you just explain a little bit of the end of your journey, how you came? I assume you live here in Minnesota. How you came to live here?
Did you hear? How did you get to Minnesota? What was your story coming to Minnesota, to the United States?
The United States, I was born here.
No,
I
you're born in Moldova.
Moldova.
Yeah. How did you get to Minnesota?
Minnesota.
Minnesota, not Moldova. Yeah.
Brezhnev.
From Brezhnev.
Brezhnev. He changed. He gave American pшеницу, wheat. American gave Brezhnev wheat.
Oh, okay. The trade, the Americans gave to Soviet Union wheat, and Soviets gave Americans the immigration.
The Jews.
The Jews were able to immigrate.
Yeah. So my son-in-law said, "Let's go." I said, "No, America. I don't know. I'm happy. No, let's go." And he made us all come. And he was to. He goes to his end in St. Paul. And then he came and wouldn't even a good dinner wouldn't give it, because we went there for a dinner, and a girl and was giving everybody to eat, is to pick up from the
Appetizers.
appetizer, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Snacks.
I would say for the first time, you know,
Not so great.
not so, I don't want, oh, she went away. I, I, I thought she would say again, no, you don't want, she go away. And my wife said, why did you not take? I said, I thought she would say, please. No, says, you didn't eat. That was
So you had to learn new customs.
no custom, yeah.
Okay.
And then she didn't want to hear about eating. Go and
Well, we
make
all
your-
have stories about relatives, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. Have
Okay,
another question?
Question.
Yes, I have a question on the status of the city today. The flyer indicates that it is a part of Russia, yet it seems to be encompassed around the freed states of Poland, and Lithuania, and Estonia, those Baltic countries. What is East Prussia today, if I could ask?
East Prussia ceased to
I
exist.
didn't hear it.
He's asking the professor. That's okay.
Well,
Part of
Now,
Poland.
yeah.
the a significant amount of territory is a possession of the Russian Federation as the Kaliningrad Oblast, if I'm not mistaken, and the remainder of what had formerly been Prussia is primarily under Polish control, including Western Prussia. But I think a slice of, I think Memel is Memel part of Lithuania? Yes. But remember, the Germans were thrown out. The Prussian state, Prussia ceased to exist at the end of World War II, and it was occupied as Poland and Russian territory, and that's its status today. In fact, if you go on YouTube, there is a RT documentary on the westernmost part of Russia, which is Kaliningrad, and that's the legal status of it. And insofar as Prussia is gone and will never be restored. So this was the end of Prussia.
Question here.
What was the loss of life, on both sides,
That is
specifically for there? Just a general or any thought at all?
The statistics on this are very problematic. There's been, I didn't have the time to do the kind of research on what the current status of the estimates are, but there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the number of German civilian deaths. Russian statistics are always a little problematic. I can give you some ballpark figures, but I'm not, I'm kind of hesitant to speak with any authority because it was a chaotic mess. Certainly there were, the Russians had many advantages and outnumbered the Germans, but the Germans fought with remarkable tenacity in a hopeless situation. So what I would encourage you to do, which if I'd had more than 2 days to get ready for this, I might have done myself, is there's actually been a couple of books that have recently come out dealing with, in English, on the Battle of Koenigsberg. And I think that there's, I mentioned this earlier before the presentation at the question and answer session, more statistics, better statistics are finally becoming available about this stuff. But I hesitate to give you any kind of real answer.
Even a ballpark.
I don't have my notes in my pocket right now. Some estimates are upwards of 30,000 dead civilians, and more than that, less than that. Russian casualties. I hesitate to give you a number. So I'm going to cop out on this one. Because I'm sorry, this is my profession and I hate this kind of inaccuracy, okay? So if I say something and someone proves me wrong, I will not sleep well.
I have a question for Yakov. Thank you for sharing your experience with us tonight. It's fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit more what it was like commanding your squad? What were your soldiers like? Were they ethnic Russians? Do you have problems with discipline coming from Moldova, commanding non-Moldovans?
I didn't ask for all the Russians. No, they no was the question nationalities. They came
You were all Soviet soldiers.
soldiers.
That's what mattered.
Yeah.
So the worst problem was the captain that lost his rank.
Yeah.
But being from Moldova, were you respected by the other soldiers? You were the sergeant, and
No, not being from Moldova. No,
didn't matter.
no, it didn't matter.
Okay, you're all Soviet
My
soldiers.
All, all this.
And discipline was good.
Yeah. But when I came home, I start feeling what is Moldovan, what is Jew, what is nationalities.
So after the war, there were more
After the
ethnic
war,
ethnic difficulties.
Anti-Semitism, anti-Semitic, a lot. That is not to compare with Russia.
Was there another question? Yeah.
Not a question, but I have a book recommendation. There's a book called Death in the Baltic, which deals with the German civilian desperate exodus and tracking many of the families that ended up on the William Gustloff.
My family, we were in Minsk on the 50th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany in Minsk. And in the hotel we were in, there was a gathering of Russian veterans. There must have been 1,000 of them. And they had their medals on their suits, and I knew they had earned those medals. And I remember hugging both of them, and I said, I am American. Thank you.
Well, you should go to the events that Peter puts on where all of his 70 Russian World War II veterans get together. Peter does a great job in bringing forth these people that we don't know enough about. Let's end it this evening. Come up and tell these people what a great job you did. Thank you so much. We'll see you next month.
Support for this program provided by viewers like you. Thank you. Additional support provided through the Catherine B. Anderson Fund of the St. Paul Foundation. Upcoming roundtable topics can be found at www.mn-ww2roundtable.org. Production services provided by Barrows Productions.